guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video I'm going to go through how I made this wolf commission. So if you want to see how I made it, then stay tuned. And also don't forget to give it a like and don't forget to subscribe. Alright, so I got this commission to make a wolf from one of my patrons. So first of all, I'm going to cast up the head in resin, and I will cast some glass eyes inside of it. So if you want to know, if you want to learn how to do that, I have a tutorial in my shop. You can find the link down in my description. So what I'm doing now is I'm just casting up the head using that technique. And then once it's cast, I go ahead and start painting all of the bits that need to be painted. So usually around the eyes, the nose and the mouth needs to be painted. So I'm using a black acrylic paint by the brand Chromacryl, but you can use any acrylic paint that you have handy. It's pretty cheap to get some tubes of paint from your local craft store. So before I actually start painting, I usually prime all of the surfaces using a primer. I have a primer video that you can check out as well. It's on my channel somewhere. I'll try and remember to link it. I never actually remember. And you can also get some good brushes. I mean, they don't have to be fantastic brushes because me personally always ends up breaking them. So yeah, just get some brushes from your craft store and they will work perfectly fine. So I usually do one coat of paint before I apply any fur, and then I'll do another coat of paint after I've applied the fur, and that way I can really highlight the areas that need to be highlighted. And sometimes when you apply the fur as well, it gets a bit lost, all the details get a bit lost, so I always just add a little bit of paint to bring out those details. And I painted the nose black here, but it was actually pink in the commissioner's images, so I changed it a little bit later on, but I'll get to that when we get to that stage. And that's what we have. So the same deal with the paws. These are something that I have sculpted, molded and cast in resin, but for this one I am painting it black as well using that same paint. I ended up changing brushes because using little brushes is a little bit silly, and you don't have to be too neat when you're painting this as well because it's going to be covered in fur anyway, so there's no point actually being too pedantic about it. Moving on to the fur, so I'm drawing out the pattern of the wolf. Still think it needs a little bit of tweaking because it is a brand new wolf head sculpt. It's roughly the same size as my old one, but I think it does need just a tad more tweaking around the body, the back end, but we'll get there and I will end up liking it, maybe. So I'm just drawing that out with some grey lead on the back of the fur and then cutting the section out using a small pair of sharp scissors, and then I can concentrate on cutting each section out once I've moved away from the larger bit of fabric. So this is the fur that I'm going to be using. Majority is going to be this fur. It's a medium length pile faux fur. It's quite good quality as well, and it's kind of my stock standard white faux fur that I use a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out all of the pieces, like I said, using a small pair of sharp scissors, and I prefer to use the scissors over anything else. I've found that works best for me, but you can try a knife or larger scissors or anything, a rotary cutter, and see if that works for you, but just keep in mind to only cut the backing and not the pile of the fur, because then you will cut all of the texture off and then you kind of can't really use it. So like I said, this will be the majority of my fur on the piece. The legs are going to be a different colour and the end of the tail and some of the mane. So what I've done is cut out those sections, left those out on the white bits, and then I will cut it out in a separate piece of fur and then attach them on the sewing machine. And this is my second piece of faux fur. So this texture is it's a Mongolian faux fur, and it has this sort of messy sort of texture, and it works really great for manes. So this wolf had a mane, so I thought this fur would work perfectly for it. So I've drawn out the underbody and also the bits of the mane on the neck. I'm going to cut that out using the same pair of small scissors, and then I'm going to pin them together and sew them up on the sewing machine, always keeping in mind which way the pile of the fur goes as well. So you don't want it to go backwards, because then your piece will kind of look a bit weird. So I have a post coming up on my Patreon about furs as well, and a whole lot of other material tips as well, so you can head over there. It's for my $5 and up Patreons, and the link is down below. Alrighty, so I'm going to pin all of the pieces that need to be sewn up together. So what I'm doing is I'm pinning the neck piece to the body and also the leg pieces. So I'm going to sew this together first, and then I will sew the rest of the body in full once these pieces have been sewn together. And you know, I just have not fancy pins. You don't need fancy pins, but I think these are glass head pins. And they come in a 100-piece thing. But yeah, just make sure you don't sew over the pins, because you're gonna have a bad time and probably break your needle. Alright, so moving on to the sewing, I'm only going to show a little bit of sewing because it's quite boring and it takes quite a number of hours to sew a body together. I usually leave the back end open so I can flip it the right way around. So as you can see, I'm sewing up the pieces of the grey fur to the white fur here, and then I'll go ahead and sew all the rest of it first side together. But you need to leave an end open, whichever end you want, to be able to flip it the right way around, and just make sure you have enough room to flip the legs inside out as well. And this is what we have after we've sewn it all up. So you can see what I was talking about with all of the pieces, how I have sewn them all together, and you can also see how I've left the back end open, making it easier for me to flip it around. And also the front legs, you can see how that back of it isn't sewn, just because I need to flip it inside out. So cue the flipping. And you can use tools and stuff to flip it inside out. I use small pliers sometimes, and also small blunt wooden objects. I wouldn't recommend using steel ones just because they can rip the actual fur, so you don't want to do that. You do want to be gentle while doing this. And here's what we have once it's been turned the right way around. It does need a trim, but I will end up trimming it once the doll is actually put together and you can see it as a whole. I probably wouldn't recommend trimming any other time, just because you don't know what the doll is going to look like until it's put together. So yeah, something to keep in mind. And this doll has a ball and socket armature spine, and you need this special tool to actually take it apart, but I'll make its own separate video soon. I am working on it. I know I say that like almost every video, but I am trying to come up with a good video for you, because I know I have a lot of questions about it. And the legs for this doll will be in aluminium wire, just because the feet, I find the armature is a little bit too thick and makes it not really realistic. It's a little bit too thick for the legs of the wolf, so I don't really like using the armature for my wolves, just because I don't like the way it turns out, even though the posing can be a little bit better. So once I've inserted the armature, I'll go ahead and glue the neck to the headpiece, and I usually do that before I do anything else and let that fully dry first before I move on, because I don't want it to come apart and I want that to be like a foundation of the doll. So when I add the polyfill, it won't pull apart and I can shape the doll a bit better. So I usually leave that to dry overnight, and I use a tacky fabric glue from my local craft store. And once that's all dry, go ahead and add that polyfill that I was talking about. So it's just like teddy bear stuffing, and I also have a video on that as well if you're wondering what I use. And then once I have done that, I go ahead and sew up all of the loose ends using a ladder stitch. I also have a video on that too. It should all be in my Materials 101 playlist. And this one, the ladder stitch, is specific to faux fur, because it's a little bit different when you're using just like a flat fabric, and and faux fur. So hopefully I captured the differences in that video. And but it just involves going back and forth the ladder stitch, so it's not that fun. And once I've done that, I go ahead and glue that to the resin as well, using that same glue from the neck. And I mean, you can just head to your local craft store and see what kind of glues they have. This one just says fabric glue, and I get it from Spotlight here in Australia, which I think that's like a Joann's or something over in America. But you know, it's nothing fancy. I get a big tube of it for like $15 or something, 15-20 bucks. And I've found this glue to be really good at adhering fabric to resin. I've never had any problems with it, but just test out your products before you actually do anything, because some glues can affect some resin pieces, so always test your products first. Once I've done that, I go ahead and attach the fur to the face. I'm still not sure whether I'm going to do a tutorial on this, but if I do, it'll probably be just for my patrons on my Patreon, but I'll let everyone know if I do. So what I'm doing is I'm just sort of making sure everything is in the right place and making sure nothing's going to come off, and then I usually leave it to dry overnight before I give it a trim. But just test out a few little techniques that you have in your mind and see if that works for you, and I'm sure you'll come up with something that that you like and that's your style. And here's what we have after I have given it a little trim. So I'm going to go and just clean up all of the areas, remove any fluff from the eyes and any glue from anywhere, and then patch up any spots that I think are missing things. So I just use a little brush to wipe out all of the fur particles out of the eye, and then I make sure the eye is clear and free of glue. Once I'm happy with that, I go ahead and just outline the eyes itself like I said I would in the start after I've furred it, and this really brings out the details in the eyes and just sort of refines what you've done. And then you can go ahead and add any other details. So I'm recoloring the nose here in that pink color. Luckily the pink color is quite a good paint. It's Dervian Matisse paint. So it covers really well, so you can see how well that covered the black. I did a few coats to make sure it was fully covered. Once I've done that, this little wolf had some markings on the back of the tail, so I'm using my Sharpie fabric marker to add these markings, and I can't find for the life of them in Australia anymore for some reason. I'm not sure if they've discontinued them, but I really did like these markers. I thought they were really good for adding any sort of details on your fur fabric. So if you can get them, definitely get them and give them a go, because they're really fantastic markers for fur. One thing to keep in mind though is it does change the texture of the fur. So I find the Sharpie markers change the texture a little bit less than a fabric paint, but I have a post on Patreon that I'm going to be posting up very soon about the paints as well, and then I'll go into details in a separate post about that. But yeah, definitely get these markers if you can. And I also forgot to record this wolf had some scarring on the face. I don't know why, I must have just been in the zone. But I added some scarring on this wolf's face. It's across the nose and over the eye. I used some glue to actually do this, and I mixed it in with some paint. And this is what we have. And that's it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. You can also check out my Patreon at Creatures of Nat for a whole lot of different content. And you can also check me out on social media at Facebook and Instagram at Creatures of Nat. And I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.